The plane had just taken off, yet only 50 seconds later, it slammed into the ground in a bizarre angle. No one on board survived. Welcome to Obscura Files. Back in 1979, a catastrophic plane crash shook the United States to its core. A jet carrying 271 people lost an engine mid-takeoff, bursting into a massive fireball before plummeting to the ground. To this day, it remains the deadliest airline disaster on US soil. So what really happened on that plane? How did the culprit behind this tragedy actually profit from it? Now, let's travel back to 1979 and piece together the details of this catastrophic crash. O'Hare International Airport is a major aviation hub in the US, located 27 kilometers northwest of downtown Chicago. Since its opening, it's been one of the busiest airports on the planet, once holding the title of the world's busiest by passenger traffic, and still retaining the record for the most takeoffs and landings globally, with over 2,000 flights daily. May 25, 1979, was a Friday and also Memorial Day in the US, as Americans honored the soldiers who died in battle. No one could have guessed that this day would go down as the darkest in the nation's aviation history. Thanks to the holiday and the upcoming weekend, everyone was eager to travel, turning the already bustling O'Hare into a chaotic hub of crowds. Our focus today, American Airlines Flight 191, was nearly full, carrying 258 passengers and 13 crew members. Among them were several literary figures heading to Los Angeles for a publisher's annual conference. The flight was operated by American Airlines, using a McDonnell Douglas DC-1010 with the registration number on 110AA. Delivered on February 25, 1972, the plane was 7 years and 3 months old, with a total flight time of 20,000 hours. To many pilots, it was considered an excellent aircraft. On this day, the plane was scheduled to fly from Chicago O'Hare International Airport to Los Angeles International Airport. At the controls was 53-year-old Captain Walter Lux, a seasoned aviator with over 22,000 hours of flight time, 8 years specifically on the DC-10. He'd been flying the DC-10 almost since it first entered commercial service, making him a true veteran. Walter was originally supposed to be on vacation visiting his son, but he'd agreed to cover the flight last minute when a colleague had an emergency. First Officer James Dillon, 49, had 9,275 flight hours under his belt, while Flight Engineer Alfred Udoenko, 56, boasted 15,000 hours. For these three experienced crew members, this routine flight should have been a walk in the park. According to the weather forecast, the day was clear and cloudless. While the wind speed reached 22 knots, it was well within safe flying limits. The passengers settled in, unaware of the tragedy awaiting them. American Airlines had just launched a new service. Passengers could watch the plane's taxi and take off via closed-circuit TV on board. No one could have imagined that this seemingly innovative feature would force hundreds of people to witness their own final moments. The despair must have been unimaginable. At 2:30 p.m., after all passengers had boarded, the crew received the message from air traffic control. American 191, good afternoon. Taxi to runway 32R and hold. The first officer replied, American 191, roger. Taxi to 32R and hold. Thank you. Then, at exactly 3 hours 2 minutes and 38 seconds p.m., ATC gave the clearance. American 191, you are clear for takeoff. The captain responded, roger. American 191, ready for takeoff. The plane then began accelerating down the runway. Everything was proceeding as planned, no signs of trouble. Rotate. But as the plane reached approximately 1,800 meters down the runway, ATC officials witnessed a horrifying sight. The number one engine of Flight 191 suddenly flipped upward, over the top of the wing, and completely detached, slamming onto the runway below. At the same time, wet mist began billowing from the area where the engine pylon had been. That mist was actually leaking hydraulic fluid. The plane hadn't even lifted off the ground yet, and it had already lost an engine. The scene was terrifying, but there was a silver lining. The DC-1010 was equipped with 3 engines. Lose one, and as long as there were no other issues, the crew should have been able to handle it. After all, landing a plane safely with one engine out was a mandatory training exercise for every pilot. At this point, there was still a chance to save the flight. The ATC team panicked, shouting over the radio, Look at the equipment. I need emergency vehicles. One of its engines just blew off. Damn it." They immediately radioed the crew. "American 191, abort takeoff. Which runway do you want to land on?" But there was no response from the flight. The airport quickly went into emergency mode, dispatching rescue teams and vehicles to stand by. But none of this information reached the crew of Flight 191. Inside the plane, right after the engine detached, the crew felt a sudden jolt. But they had no idea what had caused it. They couldn't see the engine falling from inside the cockpit. Then came the fatal blow. All the electronic instruments in front of Captain Lux went dark. The seasoned captain immediately realized the number one engine had failed. It was responsible for powering his side of the instrument panel. There was a backup power supply, but activating it required the flight engineer to swivel his seat, unbuckle his seatbelt, and stand up, a procedure designed for mid-flight, not takeoff or landing. By this point, the plane had already reached takeoff speed. Aborting was no longer an option. They had to get the plane airborne first, then find a way to land it safely. The crew sprang into action, executing the engine failure checklist immediately. Following emergency protocols, they adjusted the plane's speed from 165 knots down to 153 knots, a speed deemed safe for climbing even with one engine out. It was the best possible move to save the plane. But what they didn't know was that when the number one engine detached, the force had severed the hydraulic lines above the left wing. These lines controlled and locked the left wing's leading edge slats in place. In simple terms, leading edge slats are panels that extend from the front of the wings to reduce the plane's required speed during takeoff and landing. Flight 191 slats had been deployed before takeoff, but with the hydraulic lines cut, the left slats couldn't stay locked. Under the immense aerodynamic pressure, the left wing slats retracted. This might seem like a small detail, but it had catastrophic consequences. The left wing now had an effective speed of 159 knots, while the right wing slats remained extended, keeping its speed at 153 knots. The plane was now drastically unbalanced. As the left wing stalled, the plane began to tilt sharply to the left. Here's the critical issue. Stall warnings only appeared on the captain's instruments, and the control column would shake to alert him, but the first officer's panel had no such indicators. With the captain's instruments dead from the engine failure, the crew had no idea the left wing had stalled. When they finally noticed the severe left bank, they tried to correct it using ailerons and right rudder. But these efforts were futile. You can't save a plane with a stalled wing. Within seconds, the plane's left bank reached a catastrophic 122 degrees. At this point, it was only 100 meters above the ground, leaving the crew with virtually no time to react. Just 50 seconds after takeoff, Flight 191 crashed into an old aircraft hangar approximately 1,400 meters from the end of the runway. Loaded with 21,000 gallons of fuel, the plane erupted into a massive fireball upon impact, its destructive force incinerating almost everything. Only the detached engine and the tail section survived the blaze. All 258 passengers and 13 crew members were killed instantly. The crash also claimed the lives of 2 employees at a nearby repair shop and left 2 others with severe burns. In the final moments before the disaster, a bystander managed to snap a photo, the last known image of Flight 191. Within 15 minutes of the catastrophic crash, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) was notified. They immediately formed a special investigation team, which flew from Washington, D.C. to Chicago the same day to probe the horrific disaster. Witnesses confirmed that the left engine had detached before the crash, so the team split into 2 groups, one examining the fallen number 1 engine, and the other sifting through the wreckage to find the plane's black boxes. They quickly found a broken bolt on the runway, appearing to be the first part to fail. Inspections confirmed it was a critical component that secured the engine to the wing. On the DC-10, the engines are attached to the wings via pylons, held in place by 3 key bolts, 2 at the front and 1 at the rear. Based on this, investigators concluded they'd found the cause. A faulty bolt had snapped during takeoff, overloading the remaining 2 until they also failed, causing the engine to detach. The investigation team wasted no time holding a press conference to announce their findings to the public. Why the rush to announce the result? Because the DC-10 had already been involved in 3 previous accidents, sparking public outrage and growing suspicions about the plane's design. The announcement was an attempt to reassure the public that the crash wasn't due to a design flaw. But was a single faulty bolt really to blame? Not exactly. Mike Mars, a metallurgist on the investigation team, made a crucial discovery. He examined the broken bolt closely and noticed the fracture was fresh, meaning the bolt had snapped during the crash, not before. Mike began digging into the plane's complete maintenance history, determined to find the real cause of the crash. Sure enough, he uncovered a critical issue in a maintenance record from 2 months before the disaster work had been done on the number 1 engine. According to McDonnell Douglas's official procedures, the engine should first be removed from the pylon, then the pylon detached from the wing. During reinstallation, the pylon is mounted on the wing first, followed by the engine. But with hundreds of connections between the engine and pylon, this process was extremely time-consuming and labor-intensive. So American Airlines Maintenance Department came up with a time-saving shortcut, removing and reinstalling the engine and pylon as a single unit. Since the pylon was attached to the wing with just 3 bolts, this meant only 3 bolts needed to be touched, saving an estimated 200 man-hours. Clever, right? But this so-called smart workaround had a fatal flaw. The engine weighed 5 tons, and the pylon 1 ton. Securing a 6-ton combined unit with just 3 bolts was no easy task. To make matters worse, the lifting equipment they used lacked precision. During installation, mechanics often had to bend or even force the unit to align with the mounting points. All these actions caused unseen damage. Due to limited space around the damaged area, the cracks went undetected during inspections. Every time the plane flew, these metal cracks grew larger and larger until finally, the pylon's bulkhead snapped and the engine tore away from the wing. Mike concluded that this reckless time-saving shortcut was the real culprit behind the crash. Later, when the pylon was recovered from the wreckage, it showed clear signs of old, pre-existing cracks, further confirming Mike's theory. All of the plane's flight data recorder black box and cockpit voice recorder CVR were recovered. However, the CVR was powered by the number 1 engine, so the last recorded sound was the first officer saying "damn." Fortunately, the black box's data was intact, documenting every detail of the crew's desperate attempt to save the plane. Investigators also ran simulations of Flight 191's final moments. When the leading edge slots retracted, the plane's stall warning would have activated, and the control column would have shaken violently. But with the number 1 engine lost and the hydraulic lines cut, the crew never received these critical alerts. Following standard engine failure procedures only accelerated the plane's loss of balance, sealing its fate. Once the full story emerged, the NTSB quickly released its final report. It stated that the crash's direct cause was the left leading edge slots retracting due to severed hydraulic lines, creating an imbalance in airspeed between the 2 wings. With no stall warnings and only engine failure procedures to follow, the crew's actions only worsened the tilt. Flying at just 100 meters above the ground, they had no room to correct the mistake. 50 seconds after takeoff, the plane crashed. The investigation team placed primary blame on American Airlines Maintenance Department. The crew, they concluded, had followed standard procedures and done everything possible to save the plane. They were not at fault. The irony: most plane crashes are caused by crew members deviating from emergency protocols. But Flight 191 crashed precisely because the pilots followed the procedures to the letter. After uncovering the cause, investigators immediately inspected all DC-10s operated by US Airlines. What they found sent chills down everyone's spines. Numerous planes had old, undetected cracks in their engine pylons. If these cracks had gone unnoticed much longer, the consequences could have been catastrophic. With a capacity of around 300 passengers, a single DC-10 crash could kill hundreds. The Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) deemed the issue so severe that they suspected design flaws might also be involved. On June 6, they revoked the DC-10's airworthiness certificate, ordering an emergency grounding. On June 26, the FAA went even further, issuing Special Federal Aviation Regulation 40, banning all DC-10s from US airspace, including those operated by foreign airlines. The announcement caused an uproar. The DC-10 was a workhorse for many airlines at the time. A grounding of this scale would mean massive financial losses. No one was hit harder than McDonnell Douglas, the plane's manufacturer. Determined to get the DC-10 back in the air, McDonnell Douglas quickly implemented critical improvements. First, they added a failsafe to the leading-edge slat's hydraulic system, ensuring the slats wouldn't retract if hydraulic fluid leaked. Second, they installed backup power supplies for the stall warning system and the leading-edge slat asymmetry alert so these warnings would still activate even if one engine failed. Finally, they redesigned the instrument panel to draw power from multiple engines and added a stall shaker to the first officer's control column, creating a redundant safety system. Beyond these fixes, McDonnell Douglas also released detailed maintenance guidelines and provided training for airline mechanics, ensuring everyone followed the correct procedures and caught potential issues early. After implementing all these improvements and inspecting and repairing all affected planes, McDonnell Douglas finally got the DC-10's airworthiness certificate reinstated. As for American Airlines, they were fined $500,000 by the US government for violating maintenance procedures and causing catastrophic harm. But did it end there? Not by a long shot. Insurance companies paid American Airlines a total of $25 million in compensation. That's right, they actually turned the profit from the disaster. McDonnell Douglas, however, wasn't so lucky. Even though the crash was mainly due to improper maintenance, public perception of the company and the DC-10 had permanently soured. Airlines lost faith in the aircraft, and McDonnell Douglas's stock plummeted by 20%. Then, on October 31, 1979, just 5 months after Flight 191 Western Airlines Flight 2605, also a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, crashed in Mexico City. The plane had mistakenly landed on a closed runway, colliding with ground vehicles. 73 people were killed, including 1 person on the ground. These repeated accidents only fueled doubts about the DC-10's safety, and sales continued to plummet. Despite McDonnell Douglas's best efforts, including an employee campaign titled "I'm proud of the DC-10," they couldn't turn public opinion around. In 1989, production of the DC-10 was officially discontinued. By 1997, McDonnell Douglas was in financial trouble and was acquired by its rival, Boeing. Looking back on this tragedy, it's haunting to think that many passengers likely watched the plane's final moments unfold on the onboard CCTV, witnessing their own impending death. The fear and despair they must have felt is unimaginable. 273 lives were lost because a maintenance department prioritized saving time over safety. At its core, this disaster was a result of corporate disregard for human life. Planes are critical modes of transportation today, carrying thousands of lives and countless families' happiness into the sky every day. No link in the chain can afford to be sloppy. Every detail must be strictly controlled. When ordinary workers strive for excellence in the mundane, that's what makes them extraordinary. Alright, that's the story of American Airlines Flight 191. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our future content. See you next time.